Well, a warm welcome to everyone today. This is Ted Patterson of Critical Path Training. So this webinar today is part 2 in a series. I think some of you might have seen the first video where I just kind of laid out the architecture of how PowerApps Portals work and gave you kind of a head start for starting to edit content and thinking about how you might want to develop things like web templates. So in today's part 2, what we're going to do is we're going to look at user management and things that basically are under the umbrella of security. So we're going to start with a security overview. We're then going to have a section on how we configure portal authentication. So we have to pick what type of identity providers, and there's a lot of details we're going to go through. We also have to figure out how we're going to manage website contacts. So one of the issues that I found with the portal when you create one out of the box is that the server-side email support's not working. So all the emails that help you manage your users, aren't working. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that and hopefully spend the most time on the last section. Once we basically got our users, under control and every user is able to basically be authenticated to a particular identity, well, then it's all about the authorization piece, what users can do what. Okay, now, what do we care about PowerApps Portals for? We want kind of a cheap, easy way, cheap and easy being relative, to develop a website, and PowerApps Portals, gives me a pretty neat way to do that. And if I want to target users anonymous users with public content, that's great. If I want users to authenticate and have secured information, that's great. And they give me a lot of flexibility as far as how I want to authenticate. Now, you're also going to have portal content, which is managed probably by business users, not overly technical people, but people who can author pages, people who might be filling out a products list, for product data that you have inside of your common data service database. Okay, and we also have web developers that might come in and kind of do some low-level work. Not that we're going to get into any of that today. Now, in the first video, I took more time to kind of go through how to create a portal. So here, I'm going to go through pretty quickly and refer you back to the first video if I'm going too fast here. But when we want to create a portal, we need a PowerApps environment with a common data service database. So basically, once you have a common data service database in your environment, you can create exactly one portal for those environments. Now, if I want to create a new portal, generally you need to give yourself a PowerApps plan. I would give yourself the plan, PowerApps Plan 2 if you're going to create multiple portals as you're doing your development work. And then you're going to be able to go to the admin center and create a new environment and choose, yes, I want a database for this environment. And then once we've created the environment and we've given it a minute or so to, basically be provisioned, so now the content database, the common database service is there, well, then we can go through the steps to create a portal, and you give it an address, and by default, it's going to have the name of your address, tedstarterportal.powerapps.portal.com, and then, as a more advanced customization option, later on, you can change it to your own, vanity URL, www.mycompany.com. Okay, now, once you've created the portal, you're going to basically get two apps. Let's go back here. I have a brand new portal that I have created. And if I go ahead and just start up the portal, for instance, let's say that I go to a different page. I want to kind of keep control of my tabs here. But if I simply just go and click on the portal, what you'll see is it will just start it up, as a user would see it. Okay. Secondly, if I go back here, a second thing that we can do is we can take the portal and we can open it up in edit mode. Let's go ahead and open that up in edit mode. And then finally, there is another important application that they've created for you, which is the portal management app. So I'm going to open the portal management app because that gives us control, over things that we can do, inside the portal itself. And quite a few of the things that we're going to be going through are going to be looking at some of these CDS entities that are particular to the portal. Well, there's the website, there's the site settings. as we go through here, I can go ahead and I can look at my contacts inside here. Now, back on the slides, once we've created our PowerApps portal, now we kind of think through what type of users. So do you want a publicly facing website where someone can come and see your content, without any type of authentication? And in our case, yes. Also note that if I go back here and I kind of take a look at the starter portal, it basically is totally open to anonymous access. So kind of the default is to make everything available, and you have to kind of work to lock things down if you only want authenticated users to see that. Okay, now you might also want authenticated users, and so once we have authenticated users, we probably want pages and certain content to be available to those authenticated users, but not to anonymous users. We might also want anonymous users or the authenticated users, to have some ability to create content, such as adding a support ticket or, basically sending in some type of a order request. Now, we also might want content managers. So am I going to be the one that's creating all the content for pages? So I probably need some type of a permission scheme that allows me to allow someone to, either author all the pages in the site or author a certain subset of pages in the site. Okay, and then finally we need, me or, some other people who are going to be the portal administrator as well. Okay, now here's the key point of the PowerApps Portal security model. Every user, no matter how we authenticate them, is going to get associated with a contact record. And so once again, inside of the common data service, we have these common entities like contact and account, and they've just chosen contact as the foundation of the whole identity model. Now, the idea is that every user gets a contact record, and that contact record is then what we could use to create other records that are our permission records. So all permissions are set in terms of a contact, and every user, has the identity, which is represented by a single contact record. Now, we have configurable authorization. So however we authenticate the user, depends on what we need. So what we're going to see is that, sometimes we just need page viewing for a user. Sometimes we might want to configure authorization so the user can author pages. We're going to see that authoring pages and authoring content in a common database service entity are different types of permissions we're going to set up differently. And then there might also be website authoring permissions. Okay, now let's start with how do users get authenticated? Now, there's one authentication scheme that's built in and for the most part works by default, which is known as local authentication. And what that means is that everything about the user identity is stored in a contact record. So the user will basically come up to your website and the user will say, I would like to register. They'll put some information inside there, and everything, including the user and a form of the password, which is a hashed value of the password, are stored in the contact record. And at that point, there is no external identity provider. So that's one option. Another option, typically what most of us are going to use is some type of external authentication. So the idea is you want authentication provided by an external identity provider. And so what would be very common would be, because you probably have Office 365 or Dynamics 365 users, and they're already up in Azure AD, they have Azure AD user accounts, you want to authenticate them, using their organizational accounts. And that works automatically as long as the users are in the same tenant as the portal, and you can configure it to work so that you allow guest users to be added to your tenant, and then they can basically come in and start using the application as well. Now, one of the things that gets to be really powerful is that if you want a third-party identity provider, I want to have people use their Facebook accounts or their Twitter accounts or their LinkedIn accounts, because over in those other identity providers, they've already created an account. Those other providers, manage their passwords and basically help them reset their passwords when they forget. And we just basically want to recognize the identity, after the third-party identity provider, has gone through the authentication process. Now, let's go ahead, and one of the things, this is going to be a little bit technical, let's go back to the portal here. And what I want to do, inside of this portal is I'm going to go back to the portal, and if I want to get to the admin center, not for Power Apps, but for the portal itself, I can choose settings. Once I choose settings, I could choose administration. And the reason I'm doing this is because this will give me a way that I can see the GUID for the Azure AD application that sits behind my portal. Now, after a second, what we're going to see is that this is going to give me the, basically the page that we use to administrate the portal. Okay, it knows that I'm waiting for it, so now it's mocking me by taking just a little bit longer here. While we're here, we're waiting for that page to spin. I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to click on Azure AD. So back in Azure AD, what we're going to see is that let's go to application registrations. And if I look at owned applications and then I look at all applications, you're basically going to see this right here. Now, I'm not sure why this took so long. Maybe I'll try this one more time just to show you how you would get there. Okay, once again, if you have the portal and then you choose settings and administration, this should open up the portal administration page. And so what I want to do is I kind of want to show you that we can get a GUID from inside here. And I'm not going to wait for that, but let's go back here and notice that whenever you create a portal, it will create a Azure AD application and it will call it Microsoft CRM Portals. So one thing that you might decide to do, is you might decide to go in and give this a better name. So let's call this one something like security demo portal. Okay, so that's change one I'm going to make. Change two is that it doesn't automatically make you an owner. So let's go back here and let's take my user account, and make sure that I have made myself a owner of this. Okay, and then the last thing that you might want to do is if you go down to authentication down here, notice that by default, it only allows you to authenticate users from the same tenant. But what you're able to do is you're able to switch this over to multi-tenant. And if you switch this over to multi-tenant, like I've done here, let's now go back to Active Directory. So back here, when I go back to Active Directory, and now we go to users, and notice that if you have external users that have been invited and basically have been registered as external users in your environment, they can now authenticate and use the portal as well. Okay, and finally I got here, here is the application ID, and the idea is that when we go over here, and if we go back here and we choose applications, now you can kind of see that there is the ID that we were looking for. Okay, now let's go back to our portal. And what I want to do this time is let's go ahead and fire up the portal. And notice that when you click the sign in, it's automatically going to have the ability to do local registration. You can turn it off if you don't like it. Okay, so the idea here is, let's say that I decided to register. And as I decide to register, one thing that you're always going to need, is to have a email address. So let's say that we come down here and, now we've added that in. What is the username? What's a little bit strange about the local registration is that it makes you add the username and then log in as your username, not as the email address. So let's say we go ahead, we've logged in, and now, this user has added a password inside there. And now the user goes ahead and registers. Okay, so now this user has created a new profile. Now, let's go back over here. I'm going to start up the portal management app, and I'm going to go down here, and we're going to look at contacts. And, if I now spin down here and we say, let's see all contacts, what we can see here, is all the different, users that have been created inside there. And if now we kind of go through the process of her basically confirming her email, let's see if I can get back here. And so if someone registers, generally we want them to, fill in the other aspects, of their name. Okay, and the idea here is that when they go ahead and save what they've done, now you can kind of see that name inside here. Also note that if this user goes back, it's going to require email confirmation. So this user can go ahead, click on that. That will send an email to the user. The user is going to have to respond to that email, before we've confirmed, and we're really going to add them as a particular user. Okay, now let's go ahead and drop out of this for a second. And now what I want to do is let's kind of use the regular Active Directory authentication. So as I look at this right here, and I kind of look at all the different contacts that we have, you might see that, you're not registered, your account, even though you have an account in Azure AD and you might be the global tenant admin and you might have been added to this environment, as the CDS system administrator, you still have to create a contact record. So let's go ahead and test that out. We're going to come back here. And this time, I'm going to go ahead and sign out. And this time, when we sign in, let's go ahead and click on Azure AD. And the idea is that that will log you in with your Azure AD account. And if there's not a contact record for you, one will automatically be created on the fly. And once we're done inside here, it should also, go and, grab information, from the portal itself as far as for Azure AD to fill it in, but now we should have an account inside there. Once again, if we come back here and we kind of take a look at portal management, and inside of portal management, we come down here and we look at contacts, what we're going to see, and you have to switch over to make sure you're seeing all contacts. You can switch, who the contact is assigned to when it's created, but by default, it's not assigned to you, so you have to kind of see all contacts. Now, let's keep going through here. And we looked at the default login screen. You've also seen that you could register a local account, and also by default, you can just go ahead and click on Azure AD, and if you're in the same tenant, it'll automatically log you in and create a contact record for you. If you're in a different tenant, remember that you have to kind of set the multi-tenant options there and add those users as external guest users. Okay, now we looked at this portal management app. Now, I kind of showed you how you can look at contacts. So the next thing I want to see is how can we configure, things like portal registration features. So there are site settings. So once again, let's go back over here, and with the portal management app, if we go to site settings, here we can see different settings. So for instance, let's say that I wanted to do something with Facebook. Okay, now let's say that we go to facebook.com/developer. And, once we've gotten here, let's go ahead and log in. So once I have logged in, we're going to need to create an application. Okay, so notice that I've now logged in. I'm going to go to my apps. So here's just kind of a quick walkthrough of how things work. But note that I can create a new app. Once you create an app, it gets an ID. And note that inside of the app, there's also things that you're going to have to do, such as specify reply URLs. Brian Knight has a couple good videos that are up in the PowerApps community site, so I don't want to spend as much time there. But the idea is that you're going to go create the app. You're going to have to make sure that your URLs are configured correctly, but then what you should have at that point, let's go back to our app. Let's go back and sign out. And so once we go ahead and sign out here, and I sign in, we should be able to either sign in with Facebook. Let's go ahead and move through this process, and it basically sees that it recognizes a Facebook identity. So basically, this account is going to completely maintain inside of Facebook. If I go to my profile and I go to manage external emails, note that Facebook is connected. If I'd rather connect tomorrow with Azure AD, I basically still have my account. So a contact record is really founded in the email address. So just because you've logged in with Facebook, if your Facebook account gets destroyed and you want to log in with Azure AD, or you want to log in with some other identity provider, as long as the email doesn't change, your profile is still the same. It's still owned by you. Okay. Now, some of the painful parts that I found is that, let's go to our third section, managing website contacts. So what you'll find is that there's a whole bunch of great behavior in emails that get sent automatically, but they don't work out of the box. So the first thing that you need to do when you've created a new portal, let me kind of get you started here. If I go back over to my site, and inside of my site, we are going to go down this path. We're going to go into Admin Center. Once you get to the Admin Center, you're going to look at your different environments. You're going to find the environment, which holds your portal. You're going to go into Settings. And generally what you need to do is you need to work through the email settings, because they're not going to be correctly configured at first. And then most importantly, you have to basically approve mailboxes so that the Outlook integration, with the Dynamics 365, now PowerApps server-side synchronization services are working. Okay, so that's step one, is you basically got to go through and you're going to have to kind of fix that. Now, the second problem is once the email starts working, you're going to have to go and address some of the email templates. So for instance, once again, I wish this wasn't such a pain, but it is. So I'm in the correct environment. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do something that's going to take me back to the old legacy UI, because that's the fastest way I found to get here today, while we're kind of still in this transition. So I'm going to go to Advanced Settings. Once you get to Advanced Settings, you can drop this down, the Settings menu, and you can find Customizations. Once you get to Customizations, there's something called Customize the System. And if you click on that, it's going to bring up this old UI that allows you to look through and basically see all the old workflow and actions which fall under the name of processes. So if I go down to processes, there are two that are basically not working. Let's go ahead and start with send invitation. So what you see here inside the slides is that the problem with send invitations is that for various reasons, what comes out of the box is something that instead of having your domain, it's hard-coded with localhost 7500. So there's a debugging technique that you can use to make that work. But what you need to do is to basically go through this process where you can't configure one of the old classic workflows while it's in an activated state. So you are going to deactivate it. Next, you're going to say set properties. And then down here, you're going to basically make a fix. And kind of the short story is that I can say, I want a URL. And now I want to go ahead and put the invitation code, and what is going to be inside the bottom. And it's going to be the invitation code. But you're going to step through and basically fix this. The other thing that we have to kind of step through and fix, let's go back here and put this into a active state, is that if I go and I take a look at another one, which is called send email for confirmation. So basically, if we go back here and there, send email confirmation, and now you're going to have to deactivate this once you open it up. It basically doesn't have the right from inside there. It's choosing from for someone who doesn't have an approved inbox. So either you have to switch it to someone who has an approved inbox or do some more things to kind of get one of the system queues working inside there. Okay, but basically once you've got those working, now you should have, things working, more smoothly. And let's go ahead and kind of show one of the things that we can do. So back here, I think I've got these things working correctly. So I'm going to go back, into the portal management app. Let's go ahead and let's go down to, in the security section, we have invitations. And so I'm going to go ahead and create a new invitation. And, this is going to be, invite Max. And what is the type? It's going to be single. And who is the contact inside here? And I don't have a contact yet, but I can just kind of create one on demand. So we might come down here and say, we want Maxwell Smart, and what's the job title? And the one thing that you have to make sure that you have, to invite someone, is basically their email. Okay, so let's go ahead and put that email inside here. Once I've got that email, let's go ahead and save and close. And once we've basically got the invitation inside here, I can drop down to the flow menu for this contact, and I can choose send invitation. And, once we send an invitation, okay, I did something incorrect there, but let's say that we move out here. Earlier I sent one to Austin. So, here's an example. And remember, you have to kind of patch that that workflow up that has this. But once someone gets this invitation, they're going to simply be able to click on it, and it gets back to redeem. They're going to go ahead and choose register, and now there's that. There's their username, or they can decide, hey, I don't want to do, a local account. I want to be a member of the portal, but let's just kind of use my Azure AD account. And now this user basically has been added to the portal. Okay, so now we've kind of seen that inside there. Let's kind of go back to our slides. And what I wanted to kind of show, was basically some of the things that you need to do, to make the email management work. And what I wanted to do is kind of go through, how do we get the invitation email working? And then the other important one is that when a user registers as a local user, they need to confirm their email address. So you have to do some work on that old classic workflow action, like I was showing you, in order to get that working correctly. Now, let's say that I want to make things a lot easier. So while you could take your portal and you could register all these third-party identity providers separately, so let's say that I register Facebook and then Twitter and then LinkedIn, what you're going to find is that if you want to do that in a far more reliable, seamless manner, you're going to basically create something in Azure AD called an Azure AD B2C Tenant. So the idea is that your portal simply has to make, one trust and one set of settings to point to your Azure AD B2C Tenant. And what's kind of nice is in the B2C Tenant is where we start configuring our trusts and our applications. And note that when you use this, you can basically set it up to, listen for Amazon, Facebook, LinkedIn, but also they have local accounts. So if someone doesn't have an identity and they go to your Azure B2C, they can simply add their username and they get verifications, And the code is so much more robust than the user management that we have inside the portal. Because the portal user management code has these actions that aren't a high priority for Microsoft to go fix, so we have to go in and fix them. But as you move over to Azure, AD B2C, that's what those guys do. That is what those guys do for a living. So things are so much smoother. The emails that go back and forth, the verification codes. So if this is something that you're interested in, let's say that I'll take a quick second. If I kind of go back over here, here's an example of an Azure AD B2C. So the idea is that you'll create a new application. And so now there's only going to be one thing that you have to configure, to your portal. Now, once you've configured the application, you're going to create these things that are called user flows. They used to be called policies. So there's one for sign up and sign in. There's another one for resetting the password. And the idea is once you have these user flows, well, they're automatically going to work with the local accounts. But now if I say manage identity provider, it gets to be easy for me to start adding in these other providers. And then as I configure things between Facebook and my Azure B2C tenant, all the complexity is there and it's completely removed from the portal. Now, if you want to step through this, I wanted to reference this great blog by a new friend of mine, Nick Dolan. He's been, one of the true advocates for Dynamics 365 portals, and just has a lot of good content. But that is the the best resource if you want to go through the process of getting Azure AD B2C tenant plugged into your portal. Okay, well now we're kind of on to the home stretch, and we've left enough time, so we don't have to hurry through this. But let's say that we basically gotten through configuring identity. Now, what I'm going to do is let's close this down, and I'm going to go back here, and let's close a whole bunch of this stuff down, and I'm going to move over to a different portal. So I wanted to kind of create a portal that would be, better to work with, to do permissions. So I wanted certain pages and things where the, business scenario was kind of more obvious. Okay, so I've got this demo portal, and let's kind of go ahead and take a look at it. We'll go ahead and we'll open it up by choosing Edit. And when I open this thing up, let's also, let's go ahead and just kind of open the portal. And I like to open up the portal in the editor because quite often if you make changes, you need to clear the cache. So if I open things up in the editor, we have the sync configuration, which quite often is important for reloading in your new security configuration. And then you have browse website. Okay, and now we should be able to go ahead and click browse website and kind of, see what that website looks like. Okay, so give me one more second to start up one more thing. And the last thing that I'm going to start up here is the portal management app. So let's start with the portal management app. Now, I'm going to go to site settings, and let's say that in our application, we're in a single organization, so we don't want to have much to do about how we authenticate. We just want everyone to authenticate with Azure AD. So notice that I can come down here and I can say registration enabled equals false. Don't allow people to create local accounts. Local login enabled equals false. Okay, and what I've seen here is that if someone goes to this portal, and as someone goes to this portal, one of the things that they're going to want to do is they're going to want to sign in. But now when I click the sign in button, I've kind of taken all the options away. There's one more step that I can make it so when they click the sign in button, it just starts Azure AD authentication. If you only have one, that's probably what you should do. But I just kind of wanted to show that you're able to kind of get rid of everything except for the Azure AD authentication. Okay, so now the user's, able to authenticate. Now, let's also go back here. And now what I want to do is, let's look at the contacts that we have in this site. So here are the different users. Note that when you create a portal, they create a handful of users that are kind of test users. So you can go ahead, let's go ahead and get rid of those, delete those. Okay. But now what we need to do is we need to move through the concepts of web roles. And then after we looked at web roles, it's going to be web page access rules, and then website permissions, and then entity permissions. So those are the main tools that you use to basically lock down a particular user. Okay, one thing I didn't note about contact is this is going to be obvious to people who have been using Dynamics 365, but two of the main entities in the Common Data Service are account and contact. Account is a company or an organization. Contact is a human being. So quite often you have one account and many contacts. And so there's a lot that you can do in terms of sending an invite, to an account and having any contact from that account automatically map to someone in your organization, who's going to be the owner. So I'm not really doing a demo big enough to show, but there is some neat things because of the one-to-many association between the account and the contact. When you have lots of users and all of them are from different companies, the account becomes a nice managing thing. Okay, now let's start with web roles. So the idea of a web role is that it's a set of permissions. Permissions that we have from web page access rules and web site access permissions. So generally, you're going to create a permission, a web role for things that you need them for. Now, the top three, administrators, anonymous users, and authenticated users, those are automatically built. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to administrators, and inside of administrators, I can basically say, who are the contacts associated with this? And I can see I've already added myself, so now I'm kind of seen as the Uber user, that can change anything inside of the portal. Okay. You also might note that, as I go to the portal, if I'm the administrator, note that you've got these front-end tools, so I can edit basically at any page that I want. If I sign out, all of a sudden all those tools go away. Okay, and if we sign back in, once I'm that authenticated user, basically those editing tools come back. Okay, now some of the other things that we're going to see inside of this demo is going to be why do we need these other web roles? Okay, so we have news authors, we have partners, and we have product managers. So back here, note that we have a partners page, but if I log out, that's a page, we only want people, who are our trusted partners to be able to see that page. And notice that, as someone signs in, if they are in the proper web role, they will start seeing, that particular page. Okay, now let's go and kind of see how we go through, making the partner page just available, to some but not all. And that's going to get into the next thing, after web roles is web page access rules. Now, a web page access rule is what we use to manage access to the pages in our site. And what's kind of interesting is you don't kind of give permissions away. By default, the anonymous user can see every page in your site. So what we start doing is we start adding these web page access rules to basically say the anonymous user can't see this. You have to be in a certain web role to see this particular page. So let's see an example right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back here to web page access, and we're going to create one which is called restrict partner pages. Now, when you create a page access rule, you basically give it a name, you have to point to your website, and then you point to a particular page. And you're setting that access rule on that page and all the child pages down below. And note that here, I'm doing a restrict read. So basically it's saying if you're not in a role that points back to this, you can't see that inside here. Okay, now if I look at this particular web access rule and we say what web roles, we have a partner's web role. Okay, and with a partner's web role, who's in the partner's web role? Let's go ahead and look at contacts. Okay, and we have our buddy Jason Bourne. Okay, so let's say that we go back here, and here's our buddy Jason. So he's going to go ahead and log in. And as Jason logs in, he is able to see the page. Okay, and he logs out, he can't. Let's try something else. So now I'm running as Austin Powers, and what we have to do is we have to move over to Demo 2, and we're running as Austin Powers, and note that that user is not seeing basically the partners page. So the way that we're going to address this is that back here, we're going to go back and we're going to then take that partner web role. We're then going to say add existing contact. And if now we go ahead and we add our buddy Austin Powers inside there, and now we've saved, now what we should be able to see here is, there is Austin. Let's go ahead and do a hard refresh, and all of a sudden partners shows up. So once again, generally you kind of plan your security to be able to, provide access at a certain page, and then all the pages under that are going to flow with the same permissions unless you go down to a child page and change the permissions there. Okay, so that's the first thing we want to be able to do is kind of allow pages to be secured so only certain groups can see them. Well, the next step is, let's say we want an author. So this guy's going to go over to news. And so once he gets to this news page right here, this user can't make changes there. So how are we going to address that? So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at another page access rule. So this one is going to be grant change to news authors. So what you'll note, if I create a new rule, I can either choose restrict read to make it so users who would have been able to see that page can't see it, or grant change basically says users who only had read-only now have read-write capabilities. So what we're going to do is we're going to create one called grant change to news authors. And we're going to point it to that news page. And once we've done that, let's go ahead and look at the related web roles. And there is news authors. Okay. And then one other thing is, let's go to website permissions. So while the web page access rules, give you permissions to a particular page and what's down below, we also need something else, which are these website access permissions. So if I go to news authors and we open that up, notice that I can give, the ability to kind of see things that are published, unpublished. Okay. Now, let's say that we have this one particular web role, which is news authors. And now let's go ahead and go to contacts. And we'll see that our buddy Maxwell Smart, we've given permissions to by adding them to this web role. Okay, so now let's do two different tests. First test will not be with Maxwell, the one I just gave permissions to, but Austin. So while Austin can get to these particular pages, he's not going to be able to make any changes. He's read-only. Okay, now let's go over here, and I'll go ahead and sign out. And now that I've signed out, we'll go ahead and sign back in, this time as Maxwell. And this time, as I sign in, note that at the home page, he doesn't have any special permissions. On the products page, he doesn't have any special permissions. But now let's go to news. And as he drops inside there, all of a sudden, here are the client-side tools. So now this author, can open this up inside here, can basically, start making changes, to the particular content, using this tool set that's been carried over from Dynamics 365 portals. Okay, now makes a change, goes ahead and saves a change, and so on. Okay, so what we've just seen there, is basically using page access rules in two different ways. One is to restrict who can see a particular page to make it secure. So only authenticated users, who are in a particular web role, can see it. Okay, now, last thing we want to do is basically look at the case where we want the user to be able to have some access, not just to pages, but to content that's in the common service database. Now, with this demo, let's go back, and what I want you to see is that this demo has this common data service solution, for product management. So the idea is I've created a product entity, so there's a common, a custom entity inside here. And if we go ahead and kind of take a look at what we've added inside here, it's got a product name, code, price. Also, the demos coming up is going to be using some of these views and forms, that are built in. Okay. Now, also note that if you have one of these particular solutions, instead of just creating the entity, you might as well create a model-driven app. So here's an example of a model-driven app, that the users in my company are able to open this up, and basically start, working with this product information. Okay. Now, obviously, this is only Dynamics 365 or PowerApps license users that can come use this, but we're going to see how kind of this can translate over to the portal. Okay, so we have this one particular entity, which is product. So what we're going to do is now we're going to go to entity permissions. Now, if I want to create a new entity permission, let's say I come up here and I'll call this one, perm1. And the idea is that now you have to pick an entity, and you can basically pick any of the entities that come out of the box. The one that we're going to create, is the one that we're going to pick here, is going to be for product. Once we pick product, we have to pick the website inside here. And then what is the scope? All the ones I'm going to create are global. But then you can see that you can pick read if you just want read access, or if you want read-write access, you can create those. You can basically check off those boxes. Okay, now I've created two different entity permissions here. So the first one is view products. Now, one of the things that I wanted to do in this website, is if someone goes to the products page, I wanted to kind of give them kind of a nice, easy way to kind of see the products that we have. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the products page. Now, this is available via anonymous access. So I have a page that people can click on and come and kind of take a look. And once again, all these items are just basically records, in my custom products entity, inside the common data service database, and I'm showing them to anonymous users. So what are the steps? Step one is to create view products, as an entity permission. Step two is to go to two existing web roles, anonymous user and authenticated user. A little bit of detail on these. Note that there is a built-in web role called anonymous user, and it has anonymous user role default set to yes. Don't change that. You can only have one web role that has that set to yes. So if you set another one to yes, this one doesn't work anymore. The idea is that if an anonymous user signs in, they automatically are part of this web role. If a user authenticates, they're automatically part of the other web role. So what we're going to see here is if I go back to that entity, view products, and we say view related, and we look at, what are the web roles we've given it to, we've basically given it to both the anonymous user and the authenticated user, which basically now means that anyone can read that content. Okay. Now, if you kind of want to see how this is kind of built, if I go back to products And, inside of products, I kind of look at this code right here, down here. Okay, here's maybe an easier way to see it. But what you can see here is that we're going to use this special thing, which is the liquid template language. And one of the things that the liquid template language is able to do is to, basically allow you to do things like enumerate through a particular set of records. And as I look down here, I'm kind of playing a little trick where if I want a category, I will basically pass a query string parameter. So the code can kind of pick up if there's a query string parameter or not. So here, you can see that entity view, logical name, labs, here is the view, here's the page size. So once again, we're able to kind of create this, view, where the anonymous user, has permissions to see all these, and we've created this, little environment where they can make some changes. Okay. Now, what we'd like to be able to do is to allow all the anonymous users and all the authenticated users to see the products, but let's kind of finish up. Maybe we want some users to be able to actually manage the products and not have to go into, a model-driven app, just do it through the portal. So I have this products list here. Now, what I want to show you here is that you're able to create entity forms. And so if I go back and I take a look at this portal, let's go back here and notice that we have products, and under products, we have products list. And what the products list is going to do for me is that it is a component that I can drop here, and it points to my entity. And, with my list, as I set it up, I can also configure it to, give me the ability to add a new product, to be able to edit an existing product, to delete an existing product. So the way I've created this is that I have a products list, and we're going to secure this page so only certain people can see it. But now we're going to have 3 different pages, which has the individual item forms, one for viewing, one for editing, one for adding. And notice if I go and I kind of take a look at these pages right here, I've kind of taken them out of the navigation, but now what you can see is that they're kind of set up so that I don't have to write any code. I just basically point people to my views and forms, and things automatically work. Okay, now to kind of see the final thing of how we're going to configure this, let's go ahead and a couple things we want to do. One is let's create a web page access rule. So I want to allow everyone to get to the products page, but below that we have a products list, and you really have to have special editing permissions before I'm going to let you get there. So we're going to create this restrict product management page, which points to product list. Okay. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to define the entity permission for editing products. So any user who's going to be able to do this, is going to have permissions to create, delete, append. Okay. So now what we have is we have this web role, which is product managers. And if I look at product managers and we kind of look at, what is the entity permissions, you can see it's edit product. And then also, what is the page access control rule? It's restrict product management. Okay, now when I look at product managers, what we're going to see here is that let's go to product managers and let's figure out what users are product managers. It's me and my buddy Austin. Okay, so first of all, let's not go to Austin. Let's go to Maxwell. And because Maxwell doesn't have the ability to kind of see the products list page under products, he just sees products. So he basically can be a consumer of what's inside there. Okay, so now let's go ahead and switch over to Austin. So Austin will sign out, and now Austin will sign back in. And so what we have now is that the products list is available. And what's really neat is how the navigation will automatically take the security into consideration and not produce links when the user doesn't have access to that. And if there's a child menu and there's no access to it, it basically just gets rid of the drop-down menu. But now this user can go to the products list. Okay, so now here's the products list. What can Austin do? Maybe Austin wants to, create a new product. So we go ahead, we click create, and we have a WP0050. Austin obviously wants the, the Austin Powers, action figure. And, what is the product category? And note that this is a user going through the portal, a user that could authenticate any way, that the portal makes possible. And I can give this user the ability to come down here and use a form, that basically is defined by behind my custom entity. And now this user goes ahead and submits. And at this point, the user can now come back and, here's the new product we've just added inside there. Can we now come down here and choose edit? And Austin Powers, spy action figure. Let's go ahead, choose submit. And finally, if I go back to the products list, what you can see is that you can configure, entity lists, to do editing, to do adding, and to do deleting. Let's go ahead and delete that inside there, and all of a sudden I've gotten rid of that. Okay, so finishing up, if I come back here, two of the things that I haven't shown, but I'll just show briefly, is that there's also entity forms and entity lists. So the entities that you create in the Common Data Service, have their own forms and lists, but think of this entity list, as a portal object that layers on top of that underlying portal object inside there. Okay, so down here, notice that I can pick any one of the lists. And likewise, for forms, I've basically created, the forms that we needed inside there. And as I look at the forms, they just point to one of the forms, that is out of the box inside there. And what gets to be kind of a neat implication here, I'll show one more thing here. Let's go ahead and we'll go back to Austin. And Austin, wants to create something new inside here. And maybe there's not quite enough for the product description, quite enough real estate. So now, how am I going to fix that? And it turns out that it's part of my entity, not part of my portal. So if I come back here, and now let's go to data, let's go to entities. Let's go ahead and, find product inside here. Once I find product and I go to forms, and there is the authoring form, let's go ahead and open that up. And, here is the form that someone has seen. And if I go to something like product description, and under product description, what I decide is under formatting, I want to make the height a lot bigger. Okay, I'll make it big enough where it's obvious that we're going to change this. Okay, now we go ahead and we hit save. And now we go ahead and we hit publish. And now if I go back to Austin's experience here and we refresh, and okay, and now I realize that one more thing that you have to do, and this will be my last demo, is we have to make sure that we bounce the cache. Okay, so just kind of the final step here. I just made that change. I'm not seeing the change. And so if I bring this up in the editor view, the reason that I want to do that is I just want to kind of sync the configuration. And then if I choose browse website, this is basically going to clear the cache. And I'll give this one more second to come back online. And now let's go back here and let's go ahead and do the refresh. And now you can kind of see that, I've made the change to my form. Okay, so we covered a lot of content there, in a single hour. But one of the neat things that I showed you there at the end, was basically how to piggyback off the views and forms of your CDS content of your custom entities. And here's an example of having an entity view. You put it on a page, it automatically controls things like paging. So it's a very low, no-code approach. And then also, you're able to put forms behind there that allow your users to add and edit. Okay, so hopefully today you've learned a bunch about portal security. One final plug here for my company, Critical Path, is that if we go ahead and we take a look at this website right here, what we should be excited about, is what type of training TED might have for us. So there's building business solutions with PowerApps and Flow. If you're really into portals and want to do a bunch of labs, we also have a day of PowerApps Portals. Between the day of PowerApps Portals, which runs on May 25th, and our more in-depth, more inclusive course, which kind of covers the entire PowerApps platform, business solutions with PowerApps and Flow. Once again, if you like this kind of training, you'd like to come listen to me for several days in a row, that's what we have for you. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for their time. We'll go ahead and send out a follow-up email later on, and it will have the recording. Or if you basically follow us on YouTube, the recording will be posted there sometime within the next day. So once again, thanks everyone for spending time with us, and hope you found the information useful.